So welcome to our lesson 2. It's Thursday, and we have most of the gang here. I think there's maybe 3 of you missing. I imagine they'll be coming in late. I might send them to see the principal if this happens again. But otherwise, we'll get the class going. We don't want to waste your time. Last week we reviewed honeybee biology, the castes, how queens would lay eggs and how long if different castes would take to emerge as adults. We talked about swarming. We reviewed the beekeeping equipment, and I'm sure you reviewed all your notes and consulted all the extra resources I gave you at the end of that class. That's wonderful. Great students. Today's class is perhaps not as exciting in the sense that we'll be, well, the first part I find exciting. It's, how to get going, how do you establish your beehive, where do you put it, your yard, and also how to get bees, which is an important aspect of beekeeping, of course. We'll have to be talking a little bit about regulations. I won't spend too much time on regulations because there's, it's a lot of text stuff, but I'll give you the broad overview and the sources of where you can get more details on that on your spare time. And we'll look also at health and safety because beekeepers do all suffer from a very, very common affliction. And we'll talk about that later in the course. So I also like to say that Lisa tried to sign up with Tom Seeley's class on the 1st of February. I mentioned this class, and apparently it's all sold out. I didn't understand how an online class could be sold out if you're just going to be sitting there listening, but I'm sorry to hear that, Lisa. But the good news is that Tom is giving another talk on the 13th of February, that's a Saturday, from 2 to 4 p.m. on something called Darwinian beekeeping. Now, and how to keep bees in a way that works with their natural lives, when we keep bees in hives and we manipulate them, well, that's somehow it's not quite natural for them. But so he goes through that work. I have Tom Seeley's latest book, which I'm reading right now. It's fantastic. It's called The Lives of Bees. I'll just show you what the cover looks like. Not the cover, but the inside page. He's a scientist. He does a lot of research. He's been doing this all his life. As a child, he was interested in honeybees, and he's about my age now. And so it's a lot of hardcore work, hardcore science. A lot of research goes into the findings that he explains in this book. So if you're keen on taking it to that level, it's serious reading. This is not a Harlequin romance. Then I recommend the book. So you all received my last email with the slide deck of last class and the videos. I don't necessarily expect you to review the class as a video, but maybe you want to. And but just let me know if you have difficulties accessing this. I want to be sure that the resources are there at your fingertips if you need them. So let's go. Slide 1 of lesson 2. I guess the trouble is getting going. Once I get going, but there we go. I'm going to hide all your faces there. So first step when you're going to decide to keep bees is finding a place to keep them. Where are you going to put those hives? They do take a bit of space, and they have to be, there's certain characteristics of all this that you want to be sure you've covered before choosing. So you want to look at, the place you choose has to be comfortable for the bees, but for you too as the beekeeper. This is a place you'll be going to frequently and spending a lot of time at. You also want to put them in such a place that it's going to be easy to get to you. You won't be discouraged saying, oh, I have to go all the way over there, or I have to climb a mountain to get to it, or something like this. So a place that's easily accessible, and also it's safe for you, the bees, and the neighbors. The picture you have here is my bee yard. You see the 7 hives there in the back, and that little building is my garage in which I keep all my equipment. It's very practical to have it nearby. Because if you forget something, it's never too far. So step 1, finding a place for your hives. Make sure you'll be going there frequently. So make sure wherever it is, you can, it's not hard to get to. It's not like a 3-hour drive or, as I said, climbing a mountain. This is a picture of the Paris Opera. Believe it or not, there are beehives on top of the Paris Opera. So those are hives that are probably a bit difficult to get to. Yet I'm sure the opera people make it more easy for these people. And here's a picture of some hives on top of Notre Dame Cathedral. This must have been before it burnt, but I'm sure they'll be putting them back up there. So in Paris, it's a very they're very open to keeping bees in institutional buildings. Very open to that. I've looked around in Ottawa, and the only place in Ottawa really where a public institution has kept bees is the Governor General's residence, but they're not visible to the visitors. They're hidden away somewhere in the back, sadly. So you'll be moving also heavy honey supers a lot in your bee yard. So that's something to keep into consideration where you choose your bee yard. Make sure you can easily move things around there, heavy things. So it should be accessible, and a vehicle access is a plus because you'll be moving heavy things. A big part of beekeeping is moving heavy things around. Here we have, these are, on the left is certainly a commercial beekeeper. A commercial beekeeper is going to have 5,000 or 10,000 hives and more. Of course, they don't work alone. They hire staff, and it's quite an intensive operation. They invest in a lot of equipment. They keep their bees on pallets, so they get these little forklifts to move things around. And on the right is probably a hobby keeper who's he has a bit of extra spare cash to buy some little equipment designed to move some stuff around. But probably, I'm assuming you and me, that's my case, we'll be using these advanced technology called wheelbarrows to to move our things around. That's what I use. My bee yard, the hives you saw in that picture, I can get a car to within about 50 meters of where they're located. So with a nice wheelbarrow, I can move heavy stuff around fairly easily. So also, where you'll want to provide sufficient space so that movement or work around the hives is not impeded. Pictures here, both have interesting things to talk about. The one on the left, you got a couple of people working around one hive, and this hive is quite easily accessible from 3 sides or 4 sides. I'm assuming you can walk on this plank if you need to. So these people can easily open it up. They can remove frames. If they have another box to put somewhere, they can put it nearby. Right behind you see a couple boxes. Nope. Very nice. There's a lot of grass there, and that's something you have to keep in mind. You know, the grass will grow. That tends to do that, and could easily start blocking your entrance. You have to keep that under control. I see they put a brick here, and maybe that's another piece of wood to try to keep that under control. On the right, we have what I would say probably an A-type personality doing a very, very good job. There's a lot of very nice things I see here. This person's built a nice windbreak. Looks like it's been specifically built for the bee yard. That helps keep the strong breezes away from the hives. Otherwise, the hive seems to be placed in a big open field, which probably has nice strong winds in the winter. This person is also placed what look like roofing asphalt tiles on the ground in front of the hives. That's fantastic for keeping the grass from growing up. They've also put a lot of gravel underneath and these beautifully set up hive base down below. Each hive rests on one of these, very level, excellent work. This is top quality stuff. The only thing that I don't like about this picture on the right is that all the hives are packed in tightly in a small space. Trying to work on a hive like this one here, the taller one in the front row, when you want to remove some supers and look into it, you can only do it from the back, and you'll be banging around the neighboring hives. So that's not to my liking. This yard is very nice, except the fact that they seem to be squeezed way too close together compared to the one on the left, where there's lots of space to work around it. So there's some wisdom I'm sharing with you when it comes time to augmenting your number of colonies. And also consider extra space. You might start with 1 or 2 hives this spring, and you'll love it so much. It's very easy to expand the number of hives you have. So you can go from 2 one summer to 6 the following summer, and to 18 the one after, without having to buy new bees. And try to find level ground. You'll be moving around with wheelbarrows or whatnot. Maybe if you're lucky, drive your car right to the hives. A level ground makes things a lot easier. I was looking around for pictures on the internet for beehives located in strange places. Well, this is in China, and I don't see. I suppose I can only imagine this location is high density, lots of people, and every square meter of land is occupied with other activities, and the only place they could put their beehives was against a cliff. So it must be quite a task trying to get to those beehives and doing what needs to be done to ensure they're doing well. I don't recommend we do that. Also, try to get a place that's not full of obstacles. As we see here, you'll be carrying heavy equipment. You'll be dressed up in your bee suit. It might be a hot day. You might have drops of perspiration dripping into your eyes. You might have been stung a couple of times. You'll be frustrated. That happens. And you might trip over something, fall, drop the box full of bees on the ground. You know, these are the kinds of things you want to avoid. So look at your site, and if there's anything like that that could cause these kinds of problems, clean it up. Of course, you know, in this part of the world, we have bears, so that's always an issue. Bears will get into your bee yard and they'll tear them apart. The bears are very keen on the larvae as well, because that's where all the rich fatty proteins are. And of course, the honey is not a bad dessert for them either. And so on the Facebook pages, I do see comments about people losing their hives. I think we mentioned that the class on Tuesday. So you have to put up an electric fence if you're living in a place with a lot of bears. I spoke to someone, I think after the class last week, or a few days ago, where my hives are in a bear area. I mean, we've seen bears more or less in that general area, but I've never had any problems with bears. And it's been several years. So either I'm lucky or one day I suppose I'll have a bear come by. So far, so good. And until I do, I'm not putting up a fence. We'll see what happens. The last, in the additional resources, for this class, there is a video on erecting a bear fence. So if you're curious about that, there's one there. Again, don't forget, jump in if you have questions or things aren't clear. So of course, you want to avoid places that are prone to flooding or damp. You know, you don't want to be flooded out. You don't want to have mosquitoes all over you when you're working. So keep that in mind. It may look high and dry this time of year, but no, sorry, in early the summer when you're putting your hives in, but maybe in April and in May, it might be underwater. However, you do want to be sure that your bees have access to drinking water. The bees do need water. It helps them cool down the hive. They'll take some water and they'll bring it back to the hive and they'll release it, and it's going to evaporate and cool the hive down on those hot days. And sometimes it helps to eat some of the honey, perhaps it's crystallized. So in our neck of the woods, in this part of the world, usually there's some fresh water around somewhere, almost everywhere. However, if you're in a particular place where there's not much water, you might want to provide a basin or something like that. If you're in an area with a lot of pools around, your neighbors have pools or you have a pool, the bees might be attracted to those. And the neighbors don't like that. So in that case, do provide water, even if there are creeks and lakes and rivers not so far away, because the bees might be tempted just to go to the pool. There's something about the chlorine that might attract them, I understand. I've never had that problem.
What's the recommended distance for away from pools?
Well, you know, bees, they fly far, right? So 5 kilometers?
No, that won't happen.
Yeah, it's a problem. So you do what you can. You know, you do what you can. And if there are pools nearby, well, see what happens. Provide some fresh water, you know, like a bird bath. That should do. And I'll see what happens.
Okay.
So also, question?
Why does it say to add floating debris?
Well, because it helps them. In this case, they have a nice edge where they can actually land on and then drink some water. Sometimes there's not a good edge. It's just like a bowl. And so if you have like pieces of wood floating around, they can land on a piece of wood and drink the water from there.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, good question. So also the orientation, you want to have your hives, well, your orientation more broadly, you want to place them in an area where there's you know, there's not much going on. It's got to be quiet. You know, you don't want to have right in front of a, you know, bike path or a road or where people are walking around a lot. And it's also, if you can, it's very difficult sometimes, and it's certainly not the case in this picture. Try to avoid nearby commercial agriculture. There's always a risk of accidental poisoning. It does happen. It shouldn't happen, and it usually doesn't happen, but it can happen. So there's a give and take, right? If you're near, like, oh, look at all these sunflowers and lavender, oh, you're going to have a lot of nectar. That's nice. If you're in the middle of the forest, it might be not so rich in terms of nectar. So there's also advantages of being around certain agricultural areas. By the way, my favorite honey is lavender honey. It's very, very good. In France, it's something you can easily find in France, of course, because they grow big lavender fields over there. I lived in France for a while, but here it's not that common. So also make sure the farm animals don't have access to your hives. You can just imagine a big cow. You think, oh, I'll put them in a pasture. A big cow might come along and think it's a nice scratching post, and there goes your bee hive. Mm-hmm. And orientation in terms of, facing which direction. The more, if you have early sunlight and late sunlight, particularly, that'll wake them up early. That'll encourage them to work later. So if you can have them facing south, southeast, southwest, with that kind of sun will warm them and encourage them to work. Of course, if it's July, they could be in the shade in July and not a problem. It's 25 degrees out, whether in the shade or not, they'll be, even the mornings might be a nice warm morning of 15 or 18 degrees, they'll be out working. But, if you're into June or August, the morning might just be 11 degrees, they'll be a bit sluggish, your bees, if they're not exposed to the sun. So it makes a difference, particularly on both ends of on the shoulder months of the summer. You'll also want it to be protected from the dominant winds in our part of the world. I think we're all from the same part of the world here, northwest winds. So in this case, these hives, and you see in the picture, they're facing south or looking almost due north. So they're protected from all those trees, from the prevailing winds. Because the winds particularly in the winter, right? They will rob those hives of any heat. It'll make it a bit harder for the bees to maintain their internal temperatures. Now, you also ideally, we don't all, again, these are all ideal scenarios, right? We don't have always the luxury of putting the hives in a perfect place, flat, with a great windbreak, surrounded by beautiful wildflowers for kilometers and kilometers, and some fresh water that's available. We don't all have that luxury. But if you do, in an ideal world, you put them in a place that has a lot of nectar and pollen-bearing flowers. The honeybees will not go for any flower. There are some flowers they don't visit. The morphology of the flower has to complement the bee's morphology, so that they can get in there, get the nectar, get the pollen. So ideally you put your bees in a lavender field. They'll also go for sunflowers, as we saw there. They go for dandelions and whatnot. You get, over time, you'll get to know there's all kinds of resources that tell you which are the melliferous flowers, the flowers that produce honey for the nectar for the bees. There's lots of resources out there. You get to summer, seeing all my life, and I never knew the name. It's called the spreading dog's bane. Anyone ever heard of that plant before, the spreading dog's bane?
No.
It's a nice plant, and if I showed you a picture, maybe I'll have to add this to this presentation. You'll say, oh yeah, I've seen that around. It's got beautiful little bell-shaped pinkish flowers, nice tender leaves. It grows about knee height, but the bees love it. So now I know the plant. I saw this plant, and I didn't know what it was. I took a picture, and I went to the Gardeners of Ottawa Facebook page or something like this, and I posted the picture, and I said, hey, does anyone know what this plant is? I had to answer in a minute. People will tell you, oh, that's the spreading dog's bane, no problem. So there's tremendous resources out there that help you understand the nature and the flowers around you and how your bees respond to them. So this is a picture of where my bees are located, just as an example. As you see, in the yellow patches here are abandoned pasture, which is full of, I would say, milkweed, raspberry patches, a bit of spreading dogbane. There's also lots of goldenrod. And beyond that, there's lots of water, rocks, and some forest. So this is not Alberta or Saskatchewan with canola fields going off to every horizon. The bees have to work hard to find nectar and pollen there. I've seen them in the water lilies. There's some bays with swampy bays, and there's water lilies. I've seen my honeybees there, and I know there's only one other person keeping honeybees here, and she has her hives up here, up in the end, up in the north part. So I don't think they mix very much, because here it's mostly water. They wouldn't be flying over that too much. But the forest in this part of the world has what we call basswood. People are familiar with this tree. If you're not, you will become familiar with it. And if your bees are near forested areas, basswood produces a high quality, very tasty honey. It was through my efforts, again, this past summer that I started to understand where my bees got their honey. And I would get a great crop of honey between around the 5th of July to around the 20th of July or 18th of July. There's a 2-week period more or less where I go from no honey being accumulated in my hives. I start to worry, my God, it's the beginning of July. There's not much surplus in my hives too. Within 2 weeks, they're filling supers of honey. And that honey is very fragrant. It's got a very flowery taste, but it also has a kick, a little minty kick to the back of your throat. So I described this flavor. I went online to the Facebook page and I said, listen, I explained the situation, and people started piping in, and some people thought it was this or that. Facebook is not full of experts, right? It's full of people with opinions. But the people with the most expertise and experience in bees said that's basswood honey. It's a very tasty honey. And it makes sense because I'm in a forest, and the basswood, there's lots of basswood there, and that's where the bees get their nectar. So it's kind of fun to learn about this. I've never really paid much attention to basswood, and big deal, but now I know. So it's great. So when you'll be establishing your hives, if you're putting your hives near the city or in the city, you'll find that they have a lot of sources of nectar. City bees do very well, so that's very interesting. You think there's not much going on, but they do well. So,
question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So, what about poisonous plants to humans, like poison parsnip or something like that? Is that an issue?
I've never heard of any nectar being an issue for our consumption. So actually, there's one nectar is Nepal, I think, and it gives you some type of hallucinogenic effect. So, but these plants, they don't go around here, so you don't have to worry about that. Otherwise, no, the nectar doesn't mean, usually the plants that are, toxic to human beings, it's their sap, right? We rub against them, the leaves, and they irritate our skin, but not the nectar.
Okay.
So, all right, that's the last of finding a place to put your colonies and looking at what's around you. Now I'll get into, a quick review of regulations. Regulations are no fun. It's hard to teach about regulations and make it exciting. I'm sorry, I'm trying. I had, in my first iteration of this, I had more text and more details, but I decided not to, because at the end of the day, it's a provincial jurisdiction. In Ontario, it's the province that has a law called the Bees Act, and it's not the municipal governments that are in charge of this. So it's not your city bylaw that talks about bees. It's under the Bees Act, under Agricultural Affairs. And in Ontario, the main rule that affects you as a beekeeper is that you cannot place a hive within 30 meters of a property boundary. All right. So that means city beekeeping is not, unless you've got an expansive property in the city, it's technically illegal. Now, I said technically because, and people will say this, that this law, it's a law, but it's not as if they've got the bee police out there looking around for beehives in the city. They basically, basically nothing will be done if you keep a hive in the city unless someone complains. Then someone will come and see you. Oh, you're not supposed to do that. I'm sorry. You have to move your hive, or something like this. You won't go to jail. You won't get a fine unless, of course, you ignore them. So that's the situation. And I know someone who keeps bees in Old Ottawa South on her front porch. It can't be seen from the street, but the bees are there. And so she's not respecting the 30 meters, but she's been doing it for a few years. Her neighbors know about it. She gives them a bit of honey, and they're all happy. They think it's really cool. So that's basically how that law works. Just if you do keep it in the city, talk to your neighbors, and then be prepared that if you have to move it, you might have to move it. So you shouldn't be placing them anywhere within 10 meters of a highway, a main road. In Quebec, it's a bit more complicated. They cannot be placed within 15 meters of a public roadway or a residential building, unless there's a fence, and then the wall height and all that. So I've got I have some links to the actual further details if you want to look into that further. I don't want to get into diagrams about distances and all that in this particular class. So if you don't have a rural property, you can network among your friends and families or colleagues to see if someone who might, because a lot of people find it very fascinating. They're happy to host a beehive on a piece of stray land or land they have somewhere outside the city. And you can offer honey in exchange for the use of property. Or remember that first slide of the cocktail party? Well, here you go. You can go to your cocktail party. Well, there you go. So, okay, how do you get bees? How do you find bees? That's the end of there's more regulations to come, but right now that was just about placing the hives, where to put them. So how do you find bees? You've decided to go for it. You're jumping in off the deep end. You've ordered a nuke, and you could order nukes right now. We talked about this. Now's the time to do it, and I think that's the best thing to do. Just do it. Get your nuke, and then you have still 4 months to figure the rest out. So assuming you've bought your nuke, and now you have to think, okay, now I have to find bees. Sorry, you got your nuke. But okay, I'm going down the wrong tangents here. So maybe you didn't get a nuke. One way of getting your bees is to catch a swarm. Assuming you didn't get a nuke, and you bought your equipment and it's June, and you say, oh, I didn't get a nuke. That's terrible. There's no nukes around for sale anywhere. I'm going to have to find bees another way. Well, one way of doing that is catching a swarm. So here we go. These pictures are not mine. They were taken off the internet. But last summer, mid-September, exactly this happened to me around the same height. And I did the same thing. I had an exact same bucket. And I just shook the branch, and all the bees fell in the bucket. And I emptied the bees inside an empty hive that had frames with the wax comb, in fact, in them. And they just made themselves at home. It's just very easy to do. One thing that surprised me was, as I was holding that bucket up, just exactly like this with my left hand, and the right hand was shaking the branch, all the bees fell in the bucket. And it was heavy. You expect bees to weigh nothing, right? One little bee weighs nothing, but 20,000 bees weigh a lot. And it's like 3 kilos of bees maybe. So think about that. It's like dropping a bag of milk in your bucket all of a sudden. So I almost dropped the bucket with the weight, but managed to save it. And so what's the advantages of catching a swarm? Well, it's free. You have many thousands of bees and a mated queen, all in one for nothing. Nature gives it to you. But there are disadvantages for swarms. You're not getting the eggs, larvae, honey, or pollen. So, I'm dumping all these bees in a new hive, but they have to start from scratch. If I was lucky, I had some comb, some frames with drawn comb, so the bees didn't have to worry about making new comb. The queen could just start laying right away. I took also a couple of frames from another hive that had honey in it, so I put that in there. So they had, the basis from which they could build a new successful colony. But typically you won't have that. And typically also, you may not have comb too if you're just putting this into a brand new hive. So you're putting all these bees into it's like moving into a house and there's no furniture, nothing in the fridge. So they have to work on it, as opposed to moving into a house where it's already there, turnkey. And also, you can't really count on this, although you can put the word out that I'm looking for swarms, because there are a lot of swarms that show up all summer long. You'll get noticed, swarm, swarm, swarm. So, you can let your local beekeeper guy or person who maybe is more connected to all that know that you'd be happy to host a swarm, because sometimes, people don't want more bees, right? So that's one way of doing it. But as I mentioned earlier, here's a short little video. I really like this video because I think this woman is really cool. She's dressed in a light summer dress and she's catching a swarm. For non-beekeepers, you're thinking swarms, my God, thousands of bees and they're all buzzing around. They're going to sting you. And clearly she's an experienced beekeeper. And this is a 2-minute video of her catching a swarm. Let's just take a few minutes to look at that. 2 minutes to look at that.
Oh my God.
Looks pretty flimsy. I like that. She says to her photographer, you want to hold that? And the photographer's not so keen on getting too close.
Oh, she's not getting stung. Oh,
This looks like a bad idea.
I know, it doesn't look like an accident about to happen, no?
God.
Oh.
Ah! How did you not get
Very
stung?
good, no? I expect you guys will all be doing things like that next summer. How's that?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Oh, come on.
I want to feel pain.
Getting of course, it's no fun to feel pain. Let's take a moment here to talk about bee stings. It's no fun to feel pain. No, I agree. But if you don't hardly ever get stung by bees, you're worried about it. You don't want to get stung. But once you've been stung a number of times, you realize, okay, it's a bit painful. But that's life. Life goes on, right? You stub your toe when you're walking to the kitchen. Oh, it hurts. But you keep on. You don't like run away and hide and sulk for the rest of the afternoon. You just keep on going, right? And the same thing with bees. You start to realize that, oh yeah, bee sting, it's not pleasant, but it goes away, and I'll just keep on doing what I was doing. So you really have to have that cool attitude when you're around the bees. You can't run and drop everything the first sting you get. Having said that, you have to be. You'll soon discover when a hive, a colony, is irritated and angry. And then on days like that, you'll best leave them alone, or you best make sure that you got a fully protective gear on. I had a hive once that was always aggressive. It was easily annoyed, and it became unpleasant to work with it because the bees are, flying against my hood, and I'd hear them going bing, 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 bing against my hood, trying to get at me, and they don't, instead of buzzing the usual frequency, like bzzz, you hear, but it's a very pleasant sound, and they're buzzing and they're relaxed. It goes up by an octave. They go, bzzz, you can tell they're not happy, and but most of the time the bees are okay. They're pretty cool. So go ahead.
One of I started looking at some nukes.
Yeah.
And a couple of the people who provide them in this area are talking about how they're bred to be non-aggressive. Is there such a thing as that?
Sure. Well, look, I had 5 or 6 hives, and there's one that was more aggressive, right? It's the genetics. They have different personalities. So they'll do what they can. I don't know how they do that. It's hard to do that when your colonies are within the areas of other bees' hives as well. If you like, I think I'm well located to do something like that because I have very few beehives where I am, and I could control which queens I'm bringing in all the time, and who they're mating with. But if your beehives are located in areas where there's hundreds of other beehives within 3 or 4 kilometers, and that happens a lot, then it's harder to control. But these guys, they know what they're doing, so they work at that. Yeah.
So just a follow-up. What should be in a regular nuke? Are we just talking about 4 frames? Are they always deep frames, or is that
not so fast? Not so fast. We'll get there very shortly. Okay. Okay. So.
Is it common that when we are starting off, we don't recognize the right kind of swarm, or like what if we get a bumblebee swarm or?
Oh no. Well, if you're going to be buying bees, you'll soon learn what a honeybee looks like. I think a lot of people don't focus on this will confuse wasps and honeybees and whatnot. It's all one big family of insects that sting you. But quickly you realize, oh, this is a honeybee. It's quite obvious. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so another option is to buy an existing colony. That's pretty rare. And if you're going to do that as someone who's starting off, make sure you get advice, because you can buy rotten old colonies infected with disease, or some that are well maintained with all the right equipment and whatnot. So that's just something to keep in mind. But the advantage is you do get an because there are beekeepers who say, listen, I'm tired of beekeeping. I want to get out of it. And they're going to, oops, I saw a chat here. Right? Why do we have floating debris? Okay, sorry. I'm not very good at following the chat, so.
That's okay. I answered the question. Sorry.
All right, okay. So make sure you have someone around who knows what they're doing if you're going to buy an existing hive. But an existing hive does have its advantages, right? Because it could be instant hive, everything's running smoothly. Hold on. I guess get advice and experience. The cost, I don't know. It all depends on what comes with it. Just a couple of boxes or 10 boxes or equipment or whatnot. But you know, it could be a good deal. There you go. And also, you need a permit to sell a hive, because you can't have people selling hives. They can be full of diseases and all that. So you need a permit. The provincial apiarist will give you a permit for that. So make sure if you buy a used hive, it comes with a permit. So number 3 is how most people will get their hives. They're to start up beekeeping around here. They'll order a nuke. Nuke stands for nucleus, which is the center of something. So the nucleus is the center of a hive. The question you just asked there was, you know, how many frames or whatnot. Well, nukes can come in 4 or 5 frames. There's no rule there. So if you're going to have 5 frames, maybe it'll be a bit more expensive, because one of the frames, you'll have an extra frame of honey or brood. It comes with, you know, those frames will have drawn comb, all nicely drawn. They'll be containing honey and pollen. There'll be several thousand bees. There'll be eggs, larvae, cap brood. So you're buying a mini hive. So this typically, that little box, you close the lid. You close that lid and put a little hole here. Hey, the bees will be happy. They're going to do their thing. Of course, they're going to be full very soon, and they'll be running out of space, and they'll quickly want to swarm. But it's a mini hive. So these are about $200 to $250. I think I sent you the link to a map that shows where all the nuke producers are and around in this part of the world, and their contacts. So yeah, this is what they do. They produce these things. So how do you install your nuke? Not that hard, right? You have your box. Notice this box is cardboard. This one was plastic. So there's different ways of putting your frames in boxes. When I got into beekeeping a little while ago, it was actually all made out of wood. It was all a mini box of wood, you know, like you see the supers or the hives. Yeah. So this person here, look, he's got a screen bottom board. He's got a bottom board there, but it's green, right? You're going to see right through it. This person here has this brand new box here with brand new frames. It's not dirty at all. And he's going to take these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames, and he's just going to put them in there. And there's another 5 here, so we'll have a total of 10 frames. Here down the bottom, you see his entrance. So he's going to put that in and put a lid on it. And there you go. He's all set. And he just goes home and comes back a week later to see how things are going. Hopefully the bees will be drawing comb here. The queen will be laying eggs, and things will be just taking off. So here you go. Take the frames out of the little nuke box and put them in your hive. This is the old wooden nuke box like they used to do before there, but they're too expensive. So here's a quick short little video of someone doing precisely that. Oops. Just to show you someone, as I said before, it's always good to see people actually doing it. Gives you an idea of what they're doing. This person looks like they're in the south, I would say southern United States, with the kind of vegetation we have there.
Whoa. What's a smoker?
Yep. Just so you can see all the bees are hanging down below there. That's one of the fears we have as new beekeepers. Oh my God!
Squishing them.
Yes, Massimo.
Squishing them.
What's that?
What about squishing them?
Oh yeah, exactly. Squishing them, which is that happens. It's pretty hard to work with your bees and not squish a few. Sadly, you do your best, but also you're always afraid that they're going to fly away. You open the box, oh my God, it's like they're full of pigeons in there, and the pigeons, if you open a box, they're all going to fly away. You're worried about the same thing, but no, the bees stick together. They stay together. They just stay together. So that's not something you should be concerned about. Look at that, just hanging there.
That might freak us out the first time.
You're wearing a bee suit, nothing to worry about.
So is that a couple of thousand bees or?
I would say that's probably 10,000 bees in there, yeah.
Okay, so
Look how they're hanging off of each other. And you have to have the queen in there too, of course.
how do you know if she's there?
Well, she's supposed to be there, right? So, and she doesn't fly away. Squeeze the bees out of the way. Yeah.
What was that?
Sugar water, I would think.
Yeah. So, whoops, what have I done here? Okay, well, that was the end of the video anyway. So she's transferred her frames of bees and she's feeding them. That, you know, depends on when you do that. If it's a strong nectar flow, you may not need to feed them. If they got honey in their frames that you gave them, they should be okay. But it doesn't hurt to feed them sugar water to help them quickly build up some comb if they don't have any. So, also, I mean, you could also make a new hive yourself from an existing one. Let's say you already have a hive, but you don't, right? You're starting from scratch. Maybe you know someone who has a hive and you say, hey, Bill, you want to split your hive for me next June or whatever, May or June? I want to get into beekeeping. And your friend might say, sure, no problems. Splitting a hive is what a lot of beekeepers do. It's a good strategy to keep them from swarming. Because if you, come May and then June, when it starts to flower, the bee population will go up, and that's when they like to swarm. And as we discussed earlier, we don't like our bees to swarm. We lose half of our workforce. So there's strategies you can use to keep them from swarming, and one of them is to reduce their population. How do you reduce the population of a beehive? Well, you just take out 4 or 5 frames full of bees and eggs and larvae and caproot and honey. You take them out and you put empty ones instead. So that hive will no longer feel like it's getting crowded. They'll think, oh, we got a lot of space here. Well, our numbers are way down, so we can't swarm now. So that's what happens to a strong hive when you remove some frames of bees and brood and honey. So, but what do you do with those frames of bees and brood and honey? Well, you're doing exactly what we just saw in the previous video. It's like getting a nuke. You're creating your own nuke from another hive. So you remove 2 or 3 frames with brood. They can have eggs, larvae, cap brood from 1 or more. It could be more strong hives. And you remove another 2 or 3 frames, some honey. It could be partially filled or at least some honey. But you ensure that the queen stays with the old hive. So you should be able to find the queen there. There's different ways of doing this, in fact. And I've added a video at the end in the resources on how to split a hive 3 different ways. There's ways where you don't have to look for the queen. And there's ways where you need to find the queen. But I did for the first time in my life. I've been keeping bees for 10 years. And frankly, I'm ashamed to say that I only did splits for the first time in my life last year, and it was remarkably easy. So once you remove those, you move those with their bees into a new hive that's all set up. So for instance, this person here has got a new hive and he's taking some frames and putting them in the box next to them, right? So the bees are all, you do this on a nice day when it's sunny, and a lot of the worker bees, the ones that are foraging, they're all out in the fields, most of them. So the bees that are still in the hive tend to be nurse bees. Those are young bees. Those bees stick very close to the brood frame, the brood comb. That's where they stay. So if you raise your frame out, they're all going to stay there where the brood is. And you just take them and put them in your new hive, and they're going to stay there. Then you have 2 options. You can introduce a new mated queen. So before you do this, you'll go and buy a queen from, let's say, that man who, that person who is breeding queens for being docile. So you go buy a queen over there, you bring it to your bee yard, and what you do is once you've added these frames of bees with no queen into a new box, you can introduce a queen to them. When you introduce the queen, they come in little cages, little tiny cages, and the exit to the cage is blocked by some sugar paste. So what you do is you put your queen in there, and all the bees will start eating that sugar, but it takes them 2 or 3 days to get through that sugar. And within those 2 or 3 days, they will get used to the scent of the new queen, and they won't feel like she's an intruder. And so the new queen will be able to emerge and start her thing. The advantage is that if you buy a queen, it costs maybe $30 or $40, she'll start laying right away. So you've just introduced 3 or 4 frames of brood, eggs, and larvae. So those 3 frames will start making new bees for you right away over the next several days. There'll be no break in the emergence of new adults, and then your new queen will start laying eggs within days as well. So you will not have much of a break in the population of your hive if you buy a mated queen. Another option is what I did last summer. I just let I let these boxes all alone with no new queen. I made 2 new, how you call these splits, right? You call them splits. I made 2 new splits, and I left the hives on their own. And what happens then is we spoke about the other day, the bees will recognize the fact that they have no queen. They don't sense a queen in the hive, and they're going to take an egg, and they're going to raise a new queen. When it hatches, they'll feed it the royal jelly, and they'll raise a new queen. That queen will emerge, go on a mating flight, come back, and start laying. Last week we talked about that, and I said the disadvantage of that is that it takes a while, right? You'll have a big break in your population. And so that particular hive will probably not, make a lot of honey that summer. So that's another way of getting bees. If that's the advantage of having more than one hive, but if you know somebody who has a hive, maybe they'll work with you and let's do a split with you, because you're also doing them a little bit of a favor. Any questions? Okay, now some more of the interesting regulatory framework, all right? Now, if you're going to get into bees, you have to register your hives annually with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Rural Affairs. They want to know who's keeping bees, where the bees are, so that if there are any diseases, they can go and check it out. They have what we call a provincial apiarist, whose job is very enjoyable job, it must be, is to visit beekeepers and check up on their hives and make sure everything's okay, because beekeeping is an important commercial activity, brings in some money, it brings in jobs. The government is interested in ensuring that the beekeeping is the bees are healthy, and that the industry is not undermined by poor beekeeping practices. So the inspector, you can inspect honeybee colonies. If the provincial apiarist sends them over, says, listen, we got some bad news. Somebody over there we got some reports that they're full of disease. Please go check it out. Or you as a beekeeper can call on this person to come and visit you if you need advice or you're concerned about this or that. Let's say you feel like your bees have been poisoned by agricultural products. You call the apiarist, he'll have a look, and they will determine what the situation is. And of course, the inspector, him or herself, can actually just drop by anytime. In this picture on the left, I see a frame full of brood. What do you see in this brood, in this frame? Something interesting.
Queen cell.
Green cells, 3 of them. Massimo, your hand is raised. Did you have a question?
What if you don't have a license, but already have a bee colony?
It's like keeping bees in the city, right? I mean, if nobody knows, no, so nobody gives you a hard time. So, but it's pretty harmless to get, it's not a license, just to register, just fill out a piece of paper. I keep 3 hives and this is the address where I keep them. That's it. So it's pretty harmless. So you also need a permit if you're going to be selling bees and or used equipment. So if you're buying equipment, you should be able to ask for a permit. Other requirements, you should also report diseases. There's just 2 diseases that you must report. One of them is foul brood, American foul brood, which is a pretty serious one. And once your bees have it, it's pretty hard to cure them from that. And it's very contagious. So it's a disease you don't want to spread around. And I've never seen it. It's pretty rare, but it happens. And the other is a small hive beetle. This is a new thing now. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, there were no small hive beetles in Canada, but now they've arrived in Southern Ontario and they're spreading. They're not that big a deal for the beekeeper, but you have to keep an eye on them and, make sure they're not overrunning your hives if you have them. the reason why there are other diseases like varroa mites, the pest of varroa mites is a lot more significant to the health of your hives, but we don't have to report that. Why? Because it's already everywhere. What's the use? Small hive beetles is just starting to move, and the only reason they want us to report that because they're trying to monitor how far and where it's going, how far advanced the infestation is. Frankly, it's going to come. There's not much we can do about it, I think. There's always conflicting forces out there, right? We have large-scale commercial beekeepers who also offer pollination services. They pollinate, so they bring their hives from southern Ontario, they drive them all the way to New Brunswick, where they have the blueberry crops, and the New Brunswick blueberry farmers pay these guys to bring their hives over. And these are the ones, that's the kind of activity that spreads diseases quickly. But we're not going to tell these people stop doing this, because the blueberry farmers in New Brunswick need them, and it's the source of a lot of jobs in southern Ontario. So there's one pressure to keep that going, but on the other hand, we'd like to stop the spread of the small hive beetle, but it's not that serious a pest, so whatever. So that's part of the discussion. You should, if you have dead honeybee colonies and used equipment, you can't let them exposed. You should take care of it, clean things up, basically. If someone reports a bee yard that's full of colonies that are dead, you might get reported, and the apiarist might come and see you. And also, you should have a sign on one of your hives in your bee yard that says, whose hives are these? Joe Blow's hives, and this is Joe Blow's address and phone number, so in case they need to contact you. Quebec, very similar. You have to register annually. You have to also maintain a register of the bees you bought, who you bought them from, and if you're moving them, you have to write that down. So in case people want, the government authorities come by, they want to kind of trace the movement of bees, to see if maybe there's some problems and they want to see where they came from.
Is that everywhere or just Quebec?
That's Quebec. And I'm just covering Quebec and Ontario here. Well, yeah, Ontario doesn't have this particular requirement. You have to register where you bought them, where you sold them, where you moved them. So every province has slightly different rules, but it's all about keeping track of your bees, making sure they're healthy, and being able to trace back, where they came from, where they're going, so that we can follow potential diseases. And this is the link to the Quebec rules there, if you want to have more details on that. Now, health and safety, I find that we're moving here along. It's 5:52. Health and safety. You'll be working with bees. Main issue for beekeepers is the back. I started off by saying there's one issue that affects a lot of beekeepers, and that could be backs. So just be careful. You're moving heavy equipment. A full deep super honey is 35 kilos. That's like 9, those 4-liter bags of milk you buy at the store. It's like 9 of them. Imagine trying to carry 9 of those in a box. This man here, what he's doing is wrong, right? You're supposed to bend your knees, la, la, la. So it's not a deep super. This is a shallow super here. So they're a bit less heavy. But, as we get older, we get more sensitive to these things. So take care of your back. So how do you, what's the strategy for sparing your back? Well, in this picture, you see you see medium supers. See the bottom one are deep. You can obviously see they're much taller, and that's the brood box. And someone asked a bit earlier, brood box, they are nukes. Should they be medium or deep frames? They always deep frames in my experience. But you can carry your honey, you can keep your honey in the medium ones. So the mediums are 18 kilos versus 35. 18 kilos still heavy, but it's a lot more manageable than the 35 kilo ones, at least for me. You can do that. And also you could, instead of removing the full super in one go into your wheelbarrow, take it to your car, you could actually, in your wheelbarrow, put an empty box next to it, and you can take out the frames one at a time, and put those into your wheelbarrow box. And then you roll your wheelbarrow to your car, and you can actually do that at another time, have another empty box in your car, or at least take this one once it's empty, and then move it to your car. You know what I'm saying. You just never move a box full of honey at one go. Try to split it up one way or another. you do that though, don't forget there's bees flying around. If you have open frames of honey all over the place, they're going to discover it very quickly. So I have a box in my wheelbarrow, but on my box I have a lid. So I take the lid off, I put the frames in, I put the lid on. I take the lid off, I put the frames on, I put the lid on. So that helps keep the bees out of the way. And one strategy to spare your back is to bring someone who's a bit stronger with you when you go to the bee yard. And you see, if you got a friend called Rocco or something like that, you say, Rocco, let's go see the bees, and have this person do the work for you. Also, make sure, as I noted before, don't have obstacles in the middle of nowhere. You're walking around with these heavy boxes and trip over these rocks or roots. Not good. If you're working alone, bring a cell phone. You have a heart attack or something like this. Don't start fires. Your smoker is an amazing fire starter. And I looked around. It didn't take me long to find this news item on the internet. A bushfire that shut down the airport. Trenton Holmes was caused by beekeepers. That happened to me once. I had my smoker, which magically was still smoking once. I set it down in the grass, and it was a dry July day, and turned around, and in no time, there was a little grass fire starting. It was no more than this, just a few centimeters around the smoker, but, it's amazing how quickly that got going. But you have to be careful. And we also hear concerns about anaphylactic shock. You get stung, and then you get inflammation. You can't breathe anymore. That is very rare. Looking at the stats, I think I saw, what is the stats? 2 people in Canada died of bee stings last year, or something along those lines. It happens. It's very rare, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be careful about it. So number 1 is avoid getting stung. Number 2 is, that's going to be pretty hard, I have to say. You'll probably get stung. If you're stung, well, scrape off the stinger as soon as possible, because the stinger will stay in your skin, and there's a little sac of venom that keeps on pumping even though the bee's gone. So scrape that off. Don't squeeze it, because if you squeeze it with your fingers, you're going to squeeze the venom right into your hand, right? And so just scrape it with your hive tool or your fingernail. And you can consider keeping an EpiPen. I bought epinephrine. The EpiPens are expensive, so it might be covered by your insurance. Me, it's not. So I bought one last year. I have a doctor friend who made a prescription, so I have it in the fridge in case it's necessary. I was showing my hives to visitors. I was a bit of a thing I was doing last summer, and I thought, since I have people coming to visit on a regular basis, I'll have this on hand. You'll be having this is your honey house. You'll be moving heavy equipment. There'll be some moving parts, hot equipment. I'm just raising these things for you for your basic knowledge. This is the kind of things you'll be getting yourself into. So here you can wear, if you want, protective gloves or footwear with steel-toed boots if you want, because those boxes are heavy if you drop one on your toe. So just keep things and remove the clutter, and things will be fewer chances of things going wrong. So that was the last slide of tonight, and I have some additional resources here. You'll find that most of them are from the University of Guelph. The University of Guelph has this tremendous video series. Has anyone out there seen any of these yet?
Yeah, I watched the one about stinging.
Very, very good.
They're very good. They're very informative. Well done.
Exactly. And the man who does it is calm. He's working his bees. He's usually got just a T-shirt on. I can't believe it. He's got his trusty assistants, who help him out. So here's one on where to set up your hive. It's not very long either. Stinging. You saw that. I think I put this reference somewhere else already. And here's one on electric fencing I spoke about. And just so that this is. Perhaps it's a bit advanced at this time, but there's a lot of talk about single versus double brood colonies, brood boxes, and they go about talking about this. So you have questions. How to introduce a queen. We talked about creating your own nukes by doing a split and introducing a queen. So here's a little video that shows you how to do that, and also how to make a split. So it's a long one, because they show you 3 different ways of doing a split there. I just watched it again this afternoon, and it's very good. So that's it. So thank you once again for coming. I noticed that you're all here. I think we're 1 participant short. That's too bad, but I'm glad most of you are still here. Next class is on Tuesday, the 2nd of February. It's about, we'll be covering, you know, okay, you got bees now. Now what? Now what do I do with my time? What am I supposed to do with these 50,000 bees? So we'll go through the season, what a beekeeper does over the season, and the kinds of things you should be watching out for, the kind of interventions you can carry out to make sure everything is going well, so that your bees have a great productive season. At this point, I'm going to turn off the recording, and I'm going to open it up for questions for those who want to stick around. Whereas those who you can leave now, go have dinner or whatever, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Bye-bye.